I want to end today with a story about one of the best entrepreneurs I've ever met, and it's a guy named Pierre, and Pierre is my brother. And 6 years ago, you got to understand, Pierre went to school as a mechanic. He was always, Pierre arguably was more entrepreneurial than I was growing up. At a very young age, he bought his first car, I think when he was 13, fixed it up, and then somebody offered him like twice as much as he paid for it. He sold it, so he's already selling cars, before he even had his license. He kept doing that a few more times, and his first car was like almost a brand new, Mustang 5.0. I was like, dude, you're on a ball. And so he decided, because of his love for cars, that he would become a mechanic, went to school, but he always had aspirations to own his own shop. So he interned at this place called Ralph McKay's. It's an automotive shop. And at the end of his internship, Ralph really enjoyed working with Pierre and said, hey, Pierre, I'd really like you to work here. And Pierre says, well, I would work here, but I really want someday to own my own shop. And he says, well, that might actually work perfect because, I'm getting older. He's like 47. He said, someday I'd like to retire. And Pierre said, well, if you're cool with it, we should sit down and figure out what would that look like. And I would love to work here maybe, or with the option to buy the company. And you hear this story a lot where people work somewhere, people promise some stuff. Anyways, first year goes by, no paperwork signed. Pierre's killing himself, trying to make, things work. The business is doing great. He says, hey, Ralph, I'd love to sit down and kind of put something on paper. And Ralph's like, yeah, things are really great. Let's talk about it after the Christmas break. Comes back from that, no conversation. So Pierre keeps working and just wants to really show Ralph he's serious. The second year goes by. They actually did so well, they added an extra bay to this garage. They're doing really well. Pierre sits down with Ralph. Ralph's like, things are just nutty. There's stuff going on with my wife. Why don't we just talk about it later? And, he didn't want to be too pushy. He said, all right, cool, we'll talk about it. That went on for 4 years. By the 4th year, Pierre sits down with Ralph and says, Ralph, I want to sit down within the next week to put some paperwork together because you've been saying it for 4 years and it hasn't happened yet, and I don't want to be a dick, but we got to figure this out. And Ralph looks at him and says, Pierre, when we first started talking about it, I honestly thought for sure, I've been doing it for 20 years, that maybe I was going to retire, but things are going so well right now, I don't see myself selling the business. And Pierre goes, that's cool, I quit. And he walked away. And I remember I was at my office that day, and he calls me as he's driving home, and he's like, Dan, I just quit my job. And I'm like, dude, aren't you supposed to be buying that place? And he's like, I don't want to talk about it. I was like, that's crazy. He's like, can you meet me at my house? I was like, cool, I'll meet you at your house. So I leave work, drive to his house, go around back, and he's just standing there on his patio. And I was like, so what's up? He goes, I don't know, whatever, short story, I'm not going to buy the place from Ralph. And I said, well, what are you going to do next? It's my favorite my question to ask people that want to be entrepreneurs. If something doesn't work out, what do you do next? And he says, oh, I don't know. And I said, well, you're going to buy your own shop. And he goes, tell you the truth, man, I freaking hate being a mechanic. I was like, well, isn't that a good lesson to learn? You almost bought a freaking mechanic shop. I mean, that's a pretty decent lesson. I said, well, what do you love to do? And he goes, I don't know. I've always thought about doing something real estate or whatever. And I said, well, real estate's interesting because I'm a tech guy and you see a lot of, opportunities and stuff. And I said, well, why don't you get into, doing commercial development or something? He goes, well, one thing that I recently did that I really loved was I helped one of my friends for the last 3 weeks. Every weekend, the guy paid him in beer. Every weekend, he would go and help his friend build this house. So for the last 3 months, he had worked with his friend and his cousins and all that to build a home. And he said, the thing that was really interesting about it is, A, I didn't know anything about building the house before I started, and now I do, to some degree. And it was really neat feeling at the end of it when we're celebrating and his family come see all the work we had done, that I knew this guy was going to spend and grow and create a family in this house. So I'd like to do that. And I'm like, cool, do that. And he's like, but I don't know how to do it. And I said, you don't need to know. Who gives a crap? Let's just do it. I was like, nobody knows how to do something the first time they do it. He said, well, I don't have any money. And I said, Pierre, I'm in. I wrote him a check for $200,000. Is all the money I had in my bank. Right? I was 2 years into my company. I'd saved a bit of money. I said, here's a check for $200,000. I just want to see you do what you love to do. So he started. And he started a company called Martell Home Builders. And, he said, I'm going to compete by selling a product that's, you know, as great as everybody else, but cheaper. And he goes off and he starts building these condos type houses, like these semi-detached they're called. And he builds 4 of them. And I think it was like 4 or 5 months later, or no, it was 6 months later, he calls me up. And I'm like, hey, Pierre, what's up? And he's like, hey, man, can we meet at my house? I was like, all right, what's going on? He's like, oh, it's just better we talk in person. Something happened to Mom? He's like, no. Okay. So I go to his house. And I remember walking in. I walk in the back. You park in back, and you walk in the door, and it's essentially his dining room and his kitchen. And I look around, there's nothing there. And I'm like, hey, Pierre, are you here? And I could hear his voice, yeah, I'm at my office, come meet me here. I'm like, no furniture. I walk through the dining room into the living room, and I'm looking around, nothing. I'm like, Pierre, did somebody break into your freaking house? And he's like, I don't want to talk about it, just meet me in my office. So I walk down the hall, and I see Pierre, and I look in his bedroom, and there's nothing there except for an air mattress and sleeping bag. I was like, dude, what's going on? That was the day I took that picture. Because I couldn't believe how messy his office was and how crazy. I was like, something's going on. So I took a picture, and he goes, promise me you'll never put that on the internet. I was like, all right, cool. He's given me permission since to use it. Anyways, I took the picture because sometimes you want to document your story, and I really loved it. And that day he told me that he essentially was going bankrupt, that the houses he built weren't selling, that he made a mistake and he built the wrong product. And he didn't have the heart to tell me because he wanted to try to make it better. He remortgaged his house. He sold everything he could sell. And what happened was he was talking to a real estate agent, and she said, you know, Pierre, you may be able to have a better chance selling your house if you stage it. And he took everything from his own house and put it in the model home. That was the day I knew that Pierre was an amazing entrepreneur. And I said, all right, man, we're going to figure this out. And, you know, I just started asking him questions like, you know, people have seen the house, why aren't they buying? And he's like, well, I'll tell you the truth. I thought I was building the house and I could sell it to the guy because the guy wants a good deal and we have the best price house. The problem is the woman is the one that makes the decision. And I'm thinking, well, I remember hearing something about that once, that, you know, the woman is like the CEO or CFO of the household. And what Pierre did is he made a mistake and he created a house that had no curb appeal. That's the industry term, no curb appeal. And it looked like this. Yep. And I don't care who you are and how good of a deal you want, if your wife or spouse or partner does not think and fall in love with that house, you aren't buying it. And it looked like that. It's horrible. Anyways, he had 4 of these. So we did the first logical step. We sold one to my littlest brother. Both Pierre and I convinced Mo that it was a good idea to be a homeowner, and I gave him $5,000 as the money to get the mortgage. He's like, why are you guys so pushy? Oh, true story. So Mo bought the first one. It created some momentum. We figured out how to get rid of the rest of them. But what we did fundamentally as a business, and really all credit to Pierre, is we said, who is the customer? Well, if it's the female or the woman in the relationship, what do they want? And he's like, I don't really know. Well, when I don't know in business, I ask my customer. Pierre's like, well, why would they tell me? And I was like, well, here's an idea. Why don't you put them, why don't you go to your friends? There are people that buy new houses in this bracket is like people like yourself. Go grab a bunch of women, put them in a van, feed them a few cocktails, and then drive them around to all the different competitors' houses and make them take notes. And at the end of the day, bring them together with your architect, and you can stay out of it, and let them design the most beautiful house based on all of their input. And he was like, that's awesome. Let's call it the customer cocktail hour and invite all these women to it. And he did. And at the end of that session, they developed a house that was not only affordable, it was absolutely gorgeous. And it looked like this. Yes. Big difference. I mean, Pierre really started to understand who his customer was. He went so far to understanding that women are the one to make the decision. On his first year at the home show, the yearly home show in his city, this was the backdrop at the show. He really got to understand his customer. In the first year, from almost going bankrupt with 4 houses, he ended that season with selling 16 houses. The year after, 32. Following year, 50. He now builds, 6.5 years later, almost 100+ homes per year. He's, I mean, one of the best entrepreneurs.